this video, and as we continue the Brandon McCloud series, we reached out to Terry Gilbert because Terry Gilbert was the attorney of record who defended the Chappelle family after the death of Brandon McCloud, 15-year-old Brandon McCloud, that we went through his bedroom and we showed you what his room looked like. It was still a time capsule after 13 years. Nothing had changed. And so we wanted to talk to you, Mr. Gilbert, and ask you a few questions, things you might remember about the case. I know it's been 13 years and you've had thousands of cases since then. But also to ask you, what are your thoughts on how this case may have set a precedent for cases like Timothy and Melissa and the 137 shots, Tanisha Anderson and Tamir Rice? So it's your show now.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate it. This is a case that I'll never forget. It has haunted me since the first day that I showed up at the house, right after the police took down the crime scene tape, and we had a demonstration there because the community activists were appalled by what happened. We joined them, and that started the process of us doing the civil case. And it was a time when we didn't have the Tamir Rice cases, we didn't have the Black Lives Matter, we didn't have Ferguson, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and all the other cases that seem to have elevated the conscience of people about police and the extraordinary power that they have in abuse of power and deadly force cases around the country. And it also was a time when we didn't really have video, where people would be able to see how some police officers really take the law into their own hands and abuse their power. So this was a time when people were still skeptical about whether or not police should be looked at as potential liars or could do something unethical or engage in misconduct. So it was a much more difficult challenge back then to bring these cases. And very few lawyers were in on these cases because they knew how difficult these cases were. And the other thing about the Brandon McCloud case was that it all happened in a little room, and the only people that really knew or could testify as to what happened were Brandon and the two cops, Habib and Kranick. Obviously, Brandon was no longer there to tell his side of the story, so the cops were free to embellish, lie, distort the truth, come up with a cover-up, and try to use their authority and recognition as police officers to sell a fabrication of what happened. So it's the situation back in 2005, which is not that long ago, was really different than it is now, where the courts, the community, even the Justice Department, at least in the last administration, would see this rash epidemic of police shootings as being a national crisis. So, but had this case occurred today, I think it would have generated a tremendous amount of outrage, not only in the black community, but in the larger progressive circles in the country, because you have a 15-year-old kid in a room minding his own business, and two rogue cops, with a very suspicious search warrant, busting into the home, running upstairs, and basically executing him in his own room. And So we pursued this case relentlessly. We hired forensic experts, DNA experts, um, pathologists, to try to reconstruct what happened in that room through science, and be in a position then to disprove the theory of the city of Cleveland and the story of the police as to how this thing happened. The police version is that they came into this very small room, as you know. It was like 5 o'clock in the morning, because they wanted to arrest this young man who allegedly robbed a pizza delivery person down the street. But what was odd about it is that they had a previous encounter with Brandon in juvenile court. And so from the beginning, they had an agenda to either arrest this kid again, put him in juvenile detention, or worse. They had it out for him, and that's what's so disturbing about this case. It was like they were on a mission to get this kid. Once they determined that he was a suspect, and they realized that this is the same kid that they tried to prosecute a year or two earlier, this is unacceptable in their mind. They have to go after him. They have to punish him. They have to teach him a lesson. And so they went into this room, and they claim that Brandon jumped out of a closet with a knife, which supposedly was a steak knife, and lunged at them across the bed. And they had a split-second moment to react, and then fired their guns, I think 20 shots. And they thought, well, no one's going to be questioning us, and except the people that really were outraged by it.
One of the shots entered into the top of Brandon's head.
So our theory about that, I mean, we actually had the coroner's office create a room.
I remember I was in the room. I went to the room
and there was
when they did it.
NAACP and George Forbes, all of us.
I was there.
We all went into the basement there.
I was there.
And we saw the room, and and it was only because of the activists that the coroner's office really took this case seriously and tried to recreate what happened. But when you see the angle of the bullets and the fact that at least one went from top to bottom, it is evidence that he was down and slumped over when he was shot. Execution style, we believe. There were many other things in this case that didn't make sense. The knife was found in the back. We think that it was that they might have tampered with it in order to get Brandon's DNA on it. The blood spatter evidence in the room seemed to suggest that he was nowhere near them when he was shot. And so all these things added up to a situation where maybe we could show that these cops are lying. The other thing is that when they were waiting outside to enter, they had claimed that they didn't know he was home. They didn't know if he was in the house. But in the running discussion with Habib and
Kranick.
The dispatch.
The dispatcher, okay. The phone call.
Yeah.
Okay.
That went on for I don't know how many minutes, 15 minutes, where they're just sitting outside waiting. One thing that struck me was that Habib said, "Well, I see his light go on in his bedroom," which led me to believe that he knew he was there.
Interesting that he knew which bedroom was his.
Right. I see the light in his bedroom go on. Also, a big issue was, did they announce themselves as they entered the home and proceeded up the stairway to the bedroom in the hallway upstairs? Melvin Chappelle, who was the brother, the uncle, had let the police in. And he testified that he never heard any announcement. And that he would have heard if the police were, shouting, "Police, police, come out, get down," or whatever they would do to defuse the situation. He never heard anything. And interestingly enough, the two black cops that were outside, who came as kind of backup and really didn't know what was going on, they all testified that they didn't hear anything inside the house of shouting or yelling before the shots rang out. And finally, we have Habib talking about, so they were joking about in the dispatch recording about something about don't forget to shoot him, and Habib said, "Absolutely." Now, one can say they're joking, but when you add all this up,
sounds like premeditation.
It shows that, like I said earlier, they were out to teach this kid a lesson. Mm-hmm. Now, were they going there to shoot him? I don't know, but they probably were going to beat the crap out of him, minimally.
Like that's not a constitutional violation.
They went into that room and they claimed they were startled by somebody with a knife. That's all they needed. Bam, bam, bam. Even the judge, O'Malley, in the opinion allowing the case to go forward, said he basically complied with Brandon basically complied with their commands, but they didn't give him a chance. They said, "Come out of the closet and drop the knife." And then before he could do anything, they started shooting. So it was one fact after the other that raised major questions about this shooting. And we thought we were on our way, even back in 2005, to be able to present to a jury and prove that this was a bad shooting. And maybe Brandon wasn't the perfect kid. Maybe he had some issues, but that had nothing to do with excusing the police, because at the time they went in there, they violated every principle of policing in what they did, and more, because this was not just recklessness or stupidity or incompetence. This was a deliberate effort to violate his life. And I think it foreshadowed where we are at now in terms of seeing the truth about these absolutely, completely unjustified shooting of young black men and women around the country.
And children.
And children, yeah. And he was a child.
Yes.
But I'll never forget the union. The Cleveland Police Union had a press conference a day or two after this happened. And they showed a picture of Brandon and they called him a thug. So this is how they dehumanize African American and people of color by portraying them as different than white people. They're thugs, they're gangsters, they're uprooted, they're not, they're undisciplined, they are predators. And I'll never forget Loomis, who got up at this press conference and said this guy was this, before there was any investigation, said he was a thug, thereby setting the tone for people looking at this case and seeing it as just another, black kid who was no good, who deserved to get shot.
Well, let's talk just a little bit about that. In the year and a half or year before he died, he was involved in like an armed robbery. Correct? Is that what they were saying that Brandon was? Is that?
I don't know if it was an armed robbery. It might have been a robbery.
Some type of robbery.
It might have been another pizza.
Okay.
Guy.
So, to my understanding, according to the law, a death sentence is not what you receive if you're found guilty for a robbery.
No.
But these officers are acting as judge, jury, and executioner in offenses that, Eric Garner, for instance, this guy is selling loose cigarettes, which are illegal. He shouldn't be dead because of that. That should not be a death sentence. Tanisha Anderson having mental illness, that should not be a death sentence.
No.
Melissa and Timothy being scared, trying to get away, should not have been a death sentence.
But you see what the tactic is.
I see the tactic.
Yeah, the tactic is to say these people's lives don't matter.
Exactly.
Thereby, we have this whole movement of Black Lives Matter because the targets of the police violence are people that don't matter, or they are not like the rest of us, and therefore they don't deserve to have the same consideration because of the fact that they are not white and privileged. And so this is all culminating now in an effort to put this on the front stage of American politics. About the racism that exists in policing. And yet, no matter how far we've come, it's still a real problem in the everyday policing in our communities. But can you imagine what it was like doing these kind of cases back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s? When you didn't have this focus, we didn't have writers and documentary people putting out the stories on these cases.
Well, technology has brought a lot of things to the public eye, and even though people still see the videos, they still somehow support the police officers in their bad actions. Do you think that that's something that people have just become brainwashed about, that no matter what police do, they're always right?
Well, there is change in that improvement in looking at these situations because of the technology, and they could see a black man like the Charleston, South Carolina man who was shot in the back,
and he was running away, trying to get away. Right.
I mean, or the McDonald in Chicago, where they just shot him cold-blooded. When people actually see this stuff, and it's almost a daily occurrence. People of well-meaning, or people with some intellect and understanding and compassion, can see how bad that is. But there's always a segment of the population. Mostly people that support Trump, who think that the police should be able to knock heads and kick ass and all that. They like that.
I often wonder, do they even think about the fact that when you allow them to do that, it doesn't protect them?
No.
Because everyone now becomes in danger?
Right. Because we have clients who are young white people who are shot and killed or paralyzed. And uh, but it's all part of the same. It may not be a racial thing for those people, but it's a systemic problem of runaway police power and the militarization of police that we've seen over the last few decades. That police are out there and they just think everybody is a potential criminal danger, and they shoot first and they ask questions later. They're not trained properly. They're not supervised. I mean, what kind of a police department allows 60 cars to get into a police chase over a muffler backfiring?
And none of them knew it was a muffler
35 minutes.
Yeah, none of them knew that it was a muffler backfiring.
This is in the year 2012.
Right.
I mean, that this kind of stuff is happening. So it's not just yes, a big part of it is racial bias and targeting the black community, but police abuse is a problem beyond that.
It is.
And it's just like they see the world as us against them, and that it's a war out there. This is not what policing was supposed to be like. Back in the 50s, and some of us are old enough to remember, we would walk down the street and the police officer would say, "Hi, son, how are you?" But not the and even in some black communities.
In the 70s, it was like that in the community I grew up in. We had police officers that were like that.
But it was after the increasing commitment of the civil rights movement and the efforts to change segregation and integrate schools and work for better economic conditions and housing conditions, and Martin Luther King moving people to take action, and that people saw that what was going on was much worse than they were willing to admit. And then the riots came, and then the police just got out of control. And even the commission, the Kerner Commission, which studied the uprisings in Detroit, Watts, Cleveland, Huff, Glenville, came to the conclusion that there were two worlds in America, one for whites and one for blacks. I mean, and that was in 1968, and 50 years later, we're still living with that. Yeah, there have been improvements. Yes, there have been a lot of mobile upward movement and more opportunities, but there's still a massive amount of people who are underclass, who are just not getting their piece of the American dream, and are subjected to repression every day. So we have a long way to go. It keeps changing and evolving and retreating and going back and forth. But the underlying problems are still there. Do
you think the answer is for state legislators to begin drafting legislation to protect the public from these type of officers? Is that a good place to start?
Well, one of the problems is there's no equal accountability. The police are able to skirt accountability on all kinds of levels, both in the terms of criminal justice accountability and internal disciplinary accountability. They are able, in Cleveland, they were able to never be subject to any kind of discipline for their brutality. Thousands and thousands of complaints went unheeded. All right? Cops who should have been removed were not only not removed, but got promotions.
Yeah, I remember.
There's no warning system. There's psychological issues that are undetected because they don't get regular screenings. And the union protects all these officers. So they're still struggling with coming up with a system of accountability and screening these people. Um, and we have a long way to go. The only, in terms of what I do as a lawyer, we have to deal with archaic laws, various immunities that are afforded police, that we have to overcome, and then the municipalities are protected. It's not like if you sue a police officer, the cities automatically have to take care of the judgments against them. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so we try to politicize these cases by saying, look, it's not just these cops on the street who are causing the problem. It's the cities and our elected representatives who are not taking it seriously and putting a stop to it by proper training, policy, and supervision. So, right now we're dealing with Euclid, which is a big problem. It's a changing community, a lot of African Americans, and a whole lot of white officers who don't know how to deal with it, and have brought their racial biases to that situation, and feel that aggressive, violent policing is the only way to teach these people a lesson. And we have the Luke Stewart case we're working on right now, who was sleeping in his car unarmed. And the cop jumped in the car, and he was afraid. He started driving away, and he was tased, he was beaten, and he was shot 5 times. And the grand jury cleared them. I mean, so we have to change the criminal system, justice system, to deal with cops in the same way they deal with everybody else. Is there probable cause that they committed a crime? Yes. Unless there is obviously facts that justify it. But a lot of these cases that we've won in front of juries were cases in which the officers were never disciplined or never had to face any charges. And some of them are still on the force.
I thought it was ironic that about 2 weeks ago it was in the news that Kranik's phone was asked for an internal affairs investigation for another case, and they found racist text messages.
Right.
And Kranik and Habib, they sued the city for discrimination and won.
That's what was so...
Is this not ironic?
That was what was so outrageous to me. They killed this kid, 15-year-old kid, executed him, and then they complained that they were in the gym on administrative leave too long while the investigation was going, and they pay those guys and some other cops that kind of money. And so a leopard never changes its spots, so Habib and Kranik were bad cops from the beginning. And now, 13 years later, we see that Kranik, anyway, is spouting racial stuff on his phone. And I blame the city of Cleveland. They should have got rid of him after the McCloud case. He had a problem in Florida before he came to Cleveland. Habib was terrorizing people all over Cleveland. He was a muscle man, tattoos, and thought he was, big shot and can do whatever he wants. So we had seen these things. The criminal defense lawyers saw these things going on. But everybody turned a blind eye to it and did nothing. And so the only thing I could say is that maybe, hopefully, that generation of police who grew up with the racist views and the idea that, it's a war and we could fight fire with fire, that those people may eventually work themselves out of these police departments, and that they can properly train the younger recruits, have a more racially balanced police force, sensitive, looking at this job as something to protect people, help people, not to to stop them because they smell weed, and then find an excuse to beat the shit out of them.
Right.
You know, goes on every day. You know, that's not what policing should be. To ratchet up your records of how many people you can arrest. So it's a big problem, and we continue to fight, and it's not easy, but you know, we feel that it's important work to done, and it's the fundamental essence of civil rights justice, because there is no more power in the hands of the government than with police. You could talk about children's and family services and environmental protection and the military and all that. Those are all proper functions of government. But the police are the most have the most contact with human beings and have tremendous power. And this is where the clash of the rights and the power of the government are taking place every day on the streets, that need to be dealt with. And people can't walk away and just say that's not our problem, because you're right. It could happen to your kid or your nephew or niece or a friend.
Right. Well, Terry, I know you have work to do, and I want to tell you thank you again for joining us today and helping us with this. We're going to be doing several series, and I will be writing a book about what happened to Brandon. I will be using public information, some of those files that you referenced. I'll be including those in the book as well. I don't think Brandon should be forgotten. I don't.
Right.
It's always troubled me that the judge who signed that warrant at 2:30 became the prosecutor who handled the case for Timothy, Melissa, Tanisha, and Tamir. And
Right.
so he went from being a judge signing search warrants, questionable search warrants, and to becoming the prosecutor who was not the voice of the victims, and that was his job. His job was to be the voice of the people who were killed. So that's very problematic for Miss Mariah. But again, I want to tell you thank you so much for being with us this afternoon, and we look forward maybe to having you again in the future so we can talk some more
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure.
about maybe when the Luke Stewart case is over, you can bring us up to date on what's happening, with that.
Right.
And anything else that you might want to talk about, you're always welcome and free to be with us.
Okay, well, it was great talking to you.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so guys, it's me. See, I let you see my face at least one time because I know how you guys get if you don't see me. I'm here. So remember, Chasing Justice. Remember to share this page. If they can't hear you, it's because you're not lifting your voice. I hope you guys got on and voted today too, because it's important. We have governors, state legislators, we have judges that are running for office, and please be informed. Google, find out who they are before you give them their vote. Don't not vote. You have to vote. So guys, I will see you soon, and thank you for joining us again. Love you.
I'm sorry I took so much time.